Marilyn Kingsley adjusted her pearl necklace and glanced at her watch. It was almost 11 o'clock. Trenton was late again. It had become a habit lately, although her husband had always tried to be home for dinner in the past. She picked up a glass of red wine and walked over to the panoramic window of their penthouse, gazing at the lights of the city at night. Her phone vibrated quietly, a message from her daughter Ashley at college. She was asking for advice on a term paper. Marilyn smiled as she typed her reply. Ashley had always been a daddy's girl, but when it came to school, she turned to her mother. Their eldest, Ethan, on the other hand, consulted his father more about his future career in business. The sound of the door opening interrupted her thoughts. Trenton entered, loosening his tie as he walked. "Sorry, honey. The meeting ran late," he said, kissing her on the cheek. He smelled of unfamiliar cologne. "I thought all your important meetings were in the morning," Marilyn remarked casually. "Some urgent issues came up with the new project. You know how it is." Trenton took out his phone and, frowning, began to type something quickly. Marilyn took a sip of wine. Her husband had never answered work messages at home before. It was their unspoken rule. Family time was family time. A week later, it was time for the annual charity gala for their company, Kingsley Pharmaceuticals. As Vice President of Public Relations, Marilyn was personally overseeing the event. She was standing at the entrance to the banquet hall, greeting guests, when she appeared, a tall blonde in an emerald dress. "Cheyenne Holbrook, our new development specialist," Trenton introduced her, placing his hand on her shoulder a little longer than propriety demanded. "She recently moved here from Seattle." "Nice to meet you," Marilyn smiled professionally. "Welcome to the team." Cheyenne turned out to be a surprisingly intelligent and well-educated conversationalist. Over dinner, she talked enthusiastically about her experience working in the pharmaceutical industry on the West Coast. Trenton couldn't take his eyes off her. "Young professionals like her are just what our company needs," he later told the board of directors. "A fresh perspective, new ideas." At home, Marilyn methodically assembled a puzzle from small pieces. Her husband's business trips became more frequent. He started wearing new suits and changed his favorite cologne. His phone was always face down, and yesterday she noticed him smiling furtively as he read his messages. 20 years of marriage had taught her a lot. For example, that the best strategy is observation. She remembered perfectly how she met Trenton. At the time, she was a junior analyst at his father's company, and he was a promising manager. Their romance developed rapidly. 6 months later, they were married, and a year after that, Ethan was born. Marilyn had always been a smart girl from a good family who knew exactly what she wanted out of life. Now, sitting in her home office, she methodically analyzed the situation. She checked Cheyenne Holbrook's social media, impeccable resume, prestigious university, charitable activities. Age, 27. Typical. The next day at the office, Marilyn overheard the secretaries talking. "Did you see her shoes? Definitely not on a development specialist's salary. And an apartment in the city center. They say she just moved there." Marilyn made a mental note. Her intuition rarely failed her, and now it was literally screaming danger. But Marilyn wasn't going to act impulsively. She always preferred to gather all the facts first. In the evening, when Trenton was late home from work again, she took out her diary and began to write down dates, events, and small details about her husband's behavior. She needed to see the whole picture before jumping to conclusions. After all, she had built this company with him, and if Trenton thought he could destroy it so easily, he was sorely mistaken. Marilyn finished her wine and closed her diary. For now, she would just watch. After all, patience was her greatest weapon. The mistake came from an unexpected source. Trenton had always been obsessed with technology, and their house was equipped with a smart home system. One evening, while trying to adjust the temperature in the bedroom via the app, Marilyn discovered that all of her husband's devices were connected to a single account, including his work tablet, which he had apparently forgotten to disconnect. She hesitated for just a second. Opening the message history, Marilyn began to read. The correspondence with Cheyenne was indecently frank. They had met at a pharmaceutical conference in Chicago 6 months ago. "I can't stop thinking about your lips," Trenton wrote. "This conference is the best thing that's happened to me in years." "What about your speech on the prospects for biotechnology?" Cheyenne teased him. "To hell with biotechnology. Shall we meet tonight?" Marilyn methodically leafed through the correspondence, noting dates and details. The messages became increasingly personal. They discussed restaurants where they met and planned trips. Trenton sent her photos of expensive jewelry, asking which one she liked best. An hour later, Marilyn had a headache, but the picture was crystal clear. First, there were meetings in hotels. Then Trenton rented an apartment for Cheyenne at River Plaza, an upscale complex in the city center. That was why he insisted on transferring some of the money to a separate account, supposedly for a new company project. She remembered that conference. Trenton had returned from there enthusiastic, talking about new prospects and young talent. Now everything fell into place. Marilyn opened her social media accounts. Cheyenne's profile looked flawless. A master's degree from Stanford, an internship at a large pharmaceutical company, impressive references. Too perfect. She spent another hour studying Cheyenne's social media. Photos from trips, professional events, charity events. But nowhere was her family or close friends to be seen. It was as if the girl had appeared out of nowhere. Marilyn went to their university website. The information was confirmed. Cheyenne had indeed studied there. But something didn't feel right. She started looking through the archives of the student newspaper and found an article from 5 years ago about a scandal involving the falsification of research results. Cheyenne's name was mentioned in passing as one of the project participants. The case was hushed up, but a bad feeling remained. The next morning, Marilyn arrived at the office as usual. Now she noticed things she hadn't noticed before. How Cheyenne accidentally ended up in the elevator with Trenton. How they exchanged glances at meetings. How he defended her ideas in front of the board of directors. At lunchtime, she went into her husband's office, ostensibly to discuss the upcoming presentation. On the desk was a photo of their family, her, Trenton, and the children on last year's vacation. Next to it was a glossy catalog of luxury real estate, open to the page with River Plaza. "Sorry, honey, I have an important meeting," Trenton said, adjusting his tie and avoiding her gaze. "Of course," Marilyn smiled. "I won't disturb you." As she left the office, she noticed Cheyenne hurrying down the hallway. She was wearing the necklace from the photo in the correspondence. That evening, sitting in her home office, Marilyn opened her laptop. She began to organize the information: dates, meetings, financial transactions. She didn't need a private investigator. She had access to corporate email, meeting schedules, and financial documents. She created a separate folder on a secure cloud drive. Now she would add new evidence to it every day. Not for a divorce, that would be too easy, but for something much more serious. Trenton had made 2 mistakes. The first was underestimating her. The second was involving the company, and the company was not just a job to Marilyn. It was her life's work, which she had built together with him. And she wouldn't let that be destroyed because of an affair with a young career woman. "Are you staying late today?" she asked as her husband was leaving in the morning. "Yes. Important negotiations." He kissed her on the cheek. Marilyn watched his receding figure. Let him think she doesn't suspect a thing. Let him think she's naive and blind. It would only play into her hands. She took out her phone and opened her calendar. An important board meeting was coming up in a month. By then, she would have gathered enough information. For now, she would watch and wait. After all, Revenge was a dish best served cold. The conference room at Kingsley Pharmaceuticals was unusually quiet. Trenton Kingsley stood at the head of a long mahogany table, scanning the assembled top executives. Marilyn sat to his right, impeccably dressed as always in a strict blue suit. Before we begin discussing the quarterly results, I have an important announcement to make. Trenton cleared his throat. Due to the expansion of the company and the launch of new projects, we need to strengthen our management team. I have decided to create the position of Deputy CEO for Strategic Development. A whisper rippled through the room. George Parker, the head of the finance department who had been with the company for 15 years, visibly tensed. I am appointing Cheyenne Holbrook to this position. Trenton smiled at the young woman sitting at the far end of the table. In her short time with the company, she has demonstrated outstanding results and an innovative approach to problem solving. Marilyn watched the reactions of those present. Jennifer Reed, head of marketing, raised her eyebrows skeptically. Michael Stone, director of production, demonstratively buried his face in his tablet. "Cheyenne, please." Trenton gestured for her to take a seat next to him opposite Marilyn. Cheyenne stood up, adjusting her perfectly fitting cream jacket. "Thank you for your trust. I am confident that together we can take the company to the next level." After the meeting, the corridors filled with hushed conversations. 6 months at the company and straight to deputy director. Jennifer was indignant. What about George? He's been waiting for a promotion for years. They say she comes from a simple family. Her father is a mechanic in a car repair shop, whispered the HR secretary. She made it on her own, got a scholarship to Stanford. Marilyn sat in her office, reviewing the appointment documents. Formally, everything was flawless. A brilliant education, impressive references, innovative ideas for the company's development. But something bothered her. 2 days later, the first strategy meeting with the new team took place. Cheyenne presented the development plan for the next year. "I suggest we focus on developing a new generation of drugs," she said confidently, showing the graphs. "Our competitors are betting on traditional medicines and we can make a breakthrough." "And where do you plan to get the funding?" Marilyn asked calmly. "Such developments require millions in investment." "I have preliminary agreements with several investment funds." Cheyenne hesitated slightly. "They are interested in cooperation. As far as I remember, all negotiations with investors must go through the corporate finance department." Marilyn allowed herself a slight smile. "It's written in the company's charter." Trenton hastened to intervene. Cheyenne took the initiative. In today's world, you have to act quickly. After the meeting, Cheyenne approached Marilyn. "I'd like to discuss a few ideas with you, maybe over lunch." "Unfortunately, I'm busy today," Marilyn replied, "but you can email your suggestions to me." That evening, Trenton was unusually quiet. He picked at his dinner distractedly, checking his phone periodically. "What did you think of Cheyenne's presentation?" he asked casually. "Ambitious," replied Marilyn, "although a little naive in the financial section." "She's a quick learner," Trenton defended her. "She has a lot of potential." "No doubt," Marilyn agreed, sipping her wine. "By the way, the kids called. They asked if we were coming to see them next weekend." Trenton visibly tensed. "I have an important meeting on Saturday. Maybe you could go alone." Marilyn nodded, mentally noting that there were no meetings scheduled for Saturday in her official calendar. The next day, she noticed Cheyenne leaving Trenton's office late in the evening when most of the employees had already left. The girl's hair was slightly tousled and her lipstick was a little smudged. Marilyn opened her laptop and added a new entry to her growing file of evidence. While Trenton thought everything was going according to plan, she would gather information. After all, the most important thing in chess is patience and the ability to think several moves ahead. The finance department was filled with its usual silence, broken only by the hum of computers. Marilyn entered George Parker's office, ostensibly to discuss the quarterly report. "How's the investment portfolio audit going?" she asked, sitting down opposite him. George took off his glasses and rubbed his nose wearily. "There are some discrepancies, especially in the projects supervised by Miss Holbrook." "Let me see." Marilyn pulled the folder of documents toward her. The numbers spoke for themselves. Over the past 3 months, about $2 million had been siphoned off through shell companies. Officially, it was for research and development. In reality, the money had vanished into thin air. "I tried to discuss this with Mr. Kingsley." George lowered his voice, but he said everything was under control. That evening, sitting in her home office, Marilyn methodically studied the copies of the documents. Behind each transaction was a network of shell companies. The trail led to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She opened her laptop and created a new email account under the name Sarah Baker. She sent the first email to Victoria Ross, head of the legal department at a rival pharmaceutical company. They had met at a conference last year. "Dear Victoria, I have some information that may be of interest to you." The next day, Marilyn noticed Trenton talking nervously on the phone in his office. An hour later, Cheyenne came in. They were arguing heatedly about something, but fell silent when the secretary appeared. In the company archives, Marilyn found documents from 10 years ago. At that time, Trenton had just started running the company after his father's death. The first suspicious deals, inflated estimates, strange consulting contracts. All this time, he was sure that the traces were safely hidden. At dinner, Trenton was unusually talkative. "Maybe we should go to the country house for the weekend. We haven't been there in a long time." "I have an important meeting on Saturday," Marilyn smiled, using his own excuse. "With whom?" A flash of concern crossed his face. "A friend from college," she said calmly, taking a sip of wine. "You don't know her." The next morning, Marilyn noticed Cheyenne leaving an expensive jewelry store in the city center. A new necklace sparkled around her neck. It was exactly the same one she had seen in an advertising catalog, worth $50,000. In her office, Marilyn opened a file containing documents about financial fraud. Now she had the full picture. Trenton wasn't just cheating on her. He was using the company as his personal piggy bank to fund his mistress's luxurious lifestyle. She began compiling a list of people she could trust. George Parker from the finance department, Maria Sullivan from security, Robert Chen from the board of directors. She sent each of them an encrypted message from her new address. That evening, while reviewing corporate emails, Marilyn stumbled upon Trenton's correspondence with investors. He was planning a major deal, the sale of part of the company's assets at a bargain price. The buyer was an unknown firm registered just a month ago. A new folder appeared in the evidence file. Now she had enough information to take action. But there was no need to rush. Every step had to be calculated with clockwork precision. "How was your day?" Trenton asked when he got home. "Productive," Marilyn replied. "How about you?" Same old, he shrugged and buried his face in his phone again. Marilyn smiled to herself. Let him think she didn't suspect a thing. Let him think she was blind and naive. Soon he would realize what a mistake he had made in underestimating her. But it would be too late. The Four Seasons restaurant was considered the perfect place for informal business meetings. Marilyn sat at a table in the far corner with Robert Chen, the oldest member of the board of directors. "New projects require careful risk analysis," she said, stirring her coffee carefully, "especially those supervised by Miss Holbrook. What specifically concerns you?" Robert looked at her intently over his glasses. "The latest presentation on biotechnology. Nice words, bright graphics. But where's the financial justification? Where's the market analysis? I'm afraid enthusiasm is no substitute for experience." The next day, she met Margaret Wilson, head of the audit committee, for lunch. It's strange that such an important project was entrusted to a newcomer, Margaret remarked. We have more experienced specialists. Trenton believes in young talent, Marilyn allowed herself a touch of irony, although perhaps he's too quick to make decisions. By the end of the week, she had spoken to every member of the board of directors. She didn't criticize anyone openly, just asked the right questions and expressed concern. On Friday, there was a business dinner with representatives of Nova Pharma, their main competitor. Marilyn sat next to their CFO. I hear you have a new deputy CEO? Quite a bold appointment. We're open to innovation, Marilyn smiled, although sometimes it leads to unexpected results. At the next meeting, she suggested assigning Cheyenne a new project, restructuring the production department. This is a great opportunity to prove yourself, she said, looking at Trenton. I'm sure Cheyenne can handle it. The project was notorious for its complexity. 3 previous managers had failed to complete it. Trenton began arriving at work later than usual. He appeared distracted at meetings and made spontaneous decisions without consulting the finance department. Mr. Kingsley approved the budget without even looking at the figures, complained George Parker. That's never happened before. At an extraordinary meeting of the board of directors, Margaret Wilson raised the issue of financial discipline. Over the last quarter, the number of unjustified expenses has increased by 40%, she said, laying out the graphs in front of her. This is an alarming indicator. Perhaps we should review the decision-making system, suggested Robert Chen. Create an additional oversight body. Trenton looked annoyed. We are operating within the approved strategy. Some spending is necessary for growth. And yet, Margaret tapped her pen on the table, the board of directors is concerned about the current situation. After the meeting, Marilyn stayed behind to talk to Robert. You know, he said thoughtfully, Trenton never used to make decisions so impulsively. People change, she replied, not always for the better. That evening, sitting in her office, Marilyn reviewed the reports. The seeds of doubt had been sown. Now she had to give them time to grow. The conference room at the Mandarin Hotel was filled with representatives from the largest pharmaceutical companies on the East Coast. Cheyenne Holbrook stood at the podium, presenting the new line of products from Kingsley Pharmaceuticals. These were her first independent negotiations at this level. Our research shows 100% effectiveness, she faltered, looking at her notes. 90%. Marilyn, sitting in the back row, noticed the representatives of Medical Solutions, their main potential partner, whispering among themselves. A $120 million contract was hanging in the balance. What are the statistics on side effects? Asked a gray-haired man in the front row. That data is still being processed, Cheyenne began, nervously shuffling through her papers. So you're asking us to invest in a product without a full safety analysis? His voice was filled with undisguised skepticism. The presentation continued for another 40 minutes. Cheyenne got confused with the numbers, couldn't answer technical questions, and when the conversation turned to financial guarantees, she completely lost her train of thought. After the meeting, the head of Medical Solutions shook his head. We have to decline the partnership. The risks are too high. Trenton, who was watching the proceedings via video link, immediately called an emergency meeting. This is a misunderstanding, he paced around his office. Cheyenne was just nervous. We can arrange another meeting. I doubt they'll agree, Marilyn remarked. First impressions are crucial. That same day, she sent a confidential letter to the board of directors. In light of recent events, I believe it is necessary to discuss the competence of certain executives. News of the failed negotiations quickly spread throughout the company. Kingsley Pharmaceuticals shares fell 3%. How could such important negotiations be entrusted to an inexperienced employee? George Parker fumed in the smoking room. Trenton tried to save the situation. He personally called the management of Medical Solutions, offered additional terms, and tried to arrange a new meeting. But it was too late. They had already begun negotiations with competitors. The next day, Marilyn accidentally left a folder with a risk analysis of the project on the table in the conference room. The document clearly showed all the shortcomings and potential problems that Cheyenne had ignored during her preparation. "Have you seen the latest calculations?" Jennifer Reed asked her colleagues. "There are basic mistakes." Cheyenne locked herself in her office. Through the frosted glass, she could be seen talking emotionally on the phone. Trenton called an emergency meeting of department heads. "I continue to have complete confidence in Miss Holbrook," he said. "We all make mistakes. But not all mistakes cost the company $120 million, someone in the room quietly remarked. Rumors began to circulate in the hallways. Secretaries whispered about seeing Trenton and Cheyenne leaving the office together late at night. A security guard talked about strange noises coming from the CEO's office after hours. "Did you notice her jewelry?" said one of the HR employees. "You definitely can't buy that on a salary like hers." Marilyn methodically collected every rumor, every conversation. She knew that a reputation in business takes years to build and can be destroyed in a matter of days. That evening, she received a letter from Robert Chen. "We need to discuss the situation urgently. The board of directors is extremely concerned." Trenton came home after midnight, smelling of whiskey. "Hard day?" Marilyn asked without looking up from her book. "Everything will be fine," he muttered. "These are just temporary difficulties." "Of course," she smiled. "But you know what your father used to say? A company's reputation is like a crystal vase, easy to break, impossible to glue back together." In her office, Cheyenne sat late into the night trying to fix mistakes in the presentation. But it was too late. Trust had been undermined, and rumors continued to spread. The next morning, Marilyn noticed several members of the board of directors gathering for an informal meeting without Trenton. She knew this was only the beginning. Soon they would have to make serious decisions about the future of the company, and she would make sure they had all the information they needed to make the right choice. After the failure with Medical Solutions, Cheyenne sat in her office trying to find a way out of the situation. A knock on the door made her jump. Marilyn was standing in the doorway with a folder of documents. "I think you'll find this useful," she said, placing the papers on the desk. "This is an analysis of the Asian market. It might be worth considering alternative partnership options." Cheyenne looked at her suspiciously. "Why do you want to help?" "Because it's in the company's best interests," Marilyn said, sitting down opposite her. "You know, I was a newbie once too, and I made mistakes too." Over the next week, they spent a lot of time together working on a new strategy. Marilyn noticed how Cheyenne was changing around her, becoming more open and sincere. "You know, I've always dreamed of building something meaningful," Cheyenne confessed one day over late coffee. "We lived very modestly when I was a child. My father was a mechanic and my mother was a nurse. I vowed to myself that I would achieve more." Marilyn listened intently, noting every detail. Ambition mixed with childhood insecurities, a desire to prove her worth to everyone, a fear of ending up a nobody again. "How did you meet Trenton?" she asked casually. "At a conference," Cheyenne faltered. "He was so attentive to my ideas. No one had ever taken me so seriously before." Marilyn saw in her eyes the same naivety with which she herself had once looked at the world. Only now did she know the price of such chance encounters. Trenton watched their growing closeness with ill-concealed concern. He began to visit Cheyenne's office more often, interrupting their conversations. "I didn't think you and Marilyn would hit it off," he said to Cheyenne one day. "She's an amazing woman," she replied. "She knows so much and has so much to teach." Marilyn noticed how nervous her husband was. He had become distracted and irritable. At meetings, he often lost his train of thought and made contradictory decisions. In the evenings, when she was alone, Marilyn methodically put together a plan. Every conversation with Cheyenne, every detail of her biography became part of the mosaic. She knew that the young mistress desperately wanted recognition and respect, and it was this desire that would become her weakness. "Do you think I'll ever be able to reach your level?" Cheyenne asked once. "Of course," Marilyn smiled. "You have everything you need. You just need to learn how to use your abilities." Cheyenne didn't notice the ambiguity in these words. She trusted Marilyn more and more, sharing her innermost thoughts. She told her about her fears, her insecurities, her desire to prove herself to everyone. Trenton was torn between the two women. He saw how Cheyenne was increasingly falling under his wife's influence, but he couldn't do anything about it. Any interference would look suspicious. "Maybe you should spend less time with Marilyn," he suggested cautiously to Cheyenne. "Why? She helps me so much. And besides, haven't you always talked about the importance of teamwork?" Meanwhile, Marilyn was preparing the ground for the decisive blow. She knew that Cheyenne, for all her ambition, was painfully dependent on the approval of others. And this hungry child inside the successful woman would be the key to her downfall. Every evening she added to her notes Cheyenne's fear of public speaking, her desperate desire to live up to high standards, the imposter complex she carefully hid. "You know, you remind me of myself when I was younger," Marilyn said once, "just as determined, willing to do anything to succeed." Cheyenne beamed at the comparison, unaware that her every word and reaction was being carefully recorded and analyzed. Trenton stayed late at the office more and more often, trying to maintain control of the situation, but the harder he tried, the more obvious his anxiety became. Marilyn knew that the moment would soon come when she could use everything she had learned, every weakness, every insecurity, every secret. And then neither Trenton nor his young mistress would be able to defend themselves. She waited patiently, like a spider spinning its web. Time was on her side. Le Bernardin was considered one of the most expensive and prestigious restaurants in the city. Marilyn had specifically chosen a table in a private booth where no one could overhear them. Cheyenne arrived right on time, dressed in a simple black dress that only emphasized her youth. "I'm glad you could make it," Marilyn smiled, noticing how nervously her companion was fidgeting with her napkin. After ordering wine and light snacks, Marilyn took a folder of documents out of her bag. "You know, Cheyenne, I thought long and hard about whether I should show you this, but I think you should know what you've gotten yourself into." The young woman looked at the financial statements, bank statements, and photographs with a blank expression. "These are the company's accounts for the last 5 years," Marilyn pointed to the figures. "Look at the dates and amounts. Every time a new, let's say, Trenton's protégé appeared, strange financial transactions began." "What do you mean?" Cheyenne paled. "Emily Porter, 2 years ago. Junior analyst, got a promotion after 3 months on the job. Disappeared a year later with a large sum of company money." Marilyn methodically laid out the documents. "Christina Marks, 4 years ago. Almost identical story. Rapid career advancement, expensive gifts, then a financial scandal and dismissal." Cheyenne looked at the photos of young women who looked like her, ambitious, beautiful, confident in their exceptionality. "It can't be," she whispered. "Trenton said I was special." "He says that to everyone," Marilyn replied softly. "That's his favorite phrase, just like the story about how our marriage has long been a formality." Tears welled up in Cheyenne's eyes. "How do you know?" "Because it's a standard scenario. First, admiration for her talents, then stories about an unhappy marriage, then promises of divorce and a future together." Marilyn poured more wine. "But it's not just the affairs. Look at these transactions. Every time it's the same pattern. Company money is funneled through shell companies. And every time his mistress becomes an unwitting accomplice in the scheme." "I don't understand." All these projects you're overseeing, all these strange investments. Have you ever wondered why the paperwork is so confusing?" Cheyenne turned even paler, but he said it was standard practice. Of course he did. And when everything comes out, you'll be the one left holding the bag, just like all the others. Fear appeared in the young woman's eyes. What should I do? Marilyn covered her hand with hers. For starters, stop being naive. Trenton doesn't love you. You're just another pawn in his game. But all those words, those promises, everyone else heard the same words and promises. Do you know what happened to them? Emily is a waitress in Jersey. Christina left the country. Their careers are ruined, their reputations destroyed. Cheyenne burst into tears, not caring that her makeup was smearing. I was such a fool. No. Marilyn handed her a napkin. You were young and ambitious. Trenton knows how to find women like that and play on their weaknesses. What happens now? That's up to you. You can continue to turn a blind eye to the truth until it's too late. Or you can make the right decision. What is that? Help me stop him, before he ruins someone else's life, and save your reputation in the process. Cheyenne was silent for a long time, staring at the documents in front of her. Then she looked up at Marilyn. Why are you helping me? After everything? Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by Trenton Kingsley, and because, unlike him, I really see potential in you. When they said goodbye at the restaurant exit, Cheyenne looked several years older. Think about what I said, Marilyn said. And remember, now you know the truth. It's up to you to decide what to do with it. That night, Cheyenne couldn't sleep, replaying every word Trenton had said, every promise he had made. She realized with horror how blind she had been all this time. After her conversation with Marilyn, the world seemed to take on a different color for Cheyenne. She began to notice details she had previously overlooked, to see signs she had ignored. On Monday, a new marketing employee joined the company, Rachel Summers, a 25-year-old Princeton graduate. Cheyenne watched as Trenton introduced her to the team, the same admiring gaze, the same compliments that had once been meant for her. Miss Summers has some amazing ideas, he said at the meeting. Such a fresh perspective on the company's development. Cheyenne sat there, clutching her folder so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She recognized every gesture, every intonation. The way he leaned in slightly when Rachel spoke, the way he lingered on her shoulder just a little too long. In her office, she began looking through old project files she had supervised. Now that Marilyn had opened her eyes, she could see the obvious, strange transactions, unexplained expenses, confusing documentation. Her signature was on every document. She wasn't just a mistress, she had become an accomplice. On Thursday, Cheyenne accidentally found an old phone in Trenton's desk drawer. It was on, and her fingers trembled as she looked through the messages. Correspondence with Emily, with Christina, everything Marilyn had said, the same words of love, the same promises of divorce, the same plans for the future. That evening, she went into his office. Trenton was sitting at his desk looking through some papers. We need to talk. Her voice sounded unexpectedly firm. Of course, dear. Is something wrong? Stop it, she said, placing the printouts in front of him. I know everything, about Emily, about Christina, about all your schemes. Trenton leaned back in his chair. Did Marilyn do this? It's not about Marilyn. It's about you using me. I was just a cover for your financial schemes. Don't be ridiculous. You know I love you. Really? She smiled bitterly. The same way you loved Emily or Christina or the way you're starting to love Rachel. His face changed. You're being too emotional. Let's talk when you've calmed down. I'm calm. For the first time in a long time, I can see everything clearly. You never intended to divorce Marilyn. You never loved me. I was just a convenient figure in your schemes. Cheyenne, listen. No, you listen to me. I'm not going to be your next victim. I won't let you destroy my career and my reputation." Trenton stood up. "Think about it. Your signature is on all the documents. You're just as much an accomplice as I am. Are you threatening me?" She shook her head. "You know what's the worst part? I really believed you. I believed every word, every promise." "We can still fix this." He tried to take her hand. Cheyenne pulled away. "Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again." As she left the office, she felt tears running down her cheeks. But these were not tears of despair. They were tears of rage and liberation. Now she knew what she had to do. The headline in the Wall Street Journal appeared on Tuesday morning: "Financial irregularities at Kingsley Pharmaceuticals. Anonymous sources report a series of suspicious transactions." Trenton threw the newspaper on the table. Who? Who could have leaked the information? Marilyn calmly sipped her coffee. "Honey, you look pale. Are you all right?" By lunchtime, the company's shares had fallen 5%. Trenton's phone was ringing off the hook with calls from alarmed investors. Robert Chen called an emergency board meeting. "Mr. Kingsley," his voice sounded cold, "we want an explanation." "This is a provocation by our competitors." Trenton tried to remain calm. "We have all the necessary documents." "Really?" Margaret Wilson raised an eyebrow. "Then why can't security find the original contracts for the last quarter?" The company's corridors were filled with a tense atmosphere of anticipation. Employees whispered in corners, discussing new details of the scandal. Every hour brought new rumors. "They say there's millions missing," whispered the secretary in the finance department. "And I heard that senior management is involved," replied her colleague. Cheyenne locked herself in her office, refusing to answer Trenton's calls. When he tried to come in, she pretended to be busy with an important conversation. By evening, the stock had fallen another 3%. Major investors began demanding an extraordinary audit. Marilyn watched the proceedings with the look of a concerned wife. "Maybe you should take some time off. You've been so stressed lately." "Not now," Trenton snapped, scanning new messages from journalists. The next day, the New York Times published an in-depth investigation. Anonymous sources provided detailed information about schemes to siphon money through shell companies. Trenton paced around his office. "This is impossible. Only I had those documents." He stopped short, looking at the closed door of Cheyenne's office. The young woman was sitting at her desk, methodically gathering her things. "What are you doing?" he burst in. "I'm leaving," she replied calmly, "and I advise you to find a good lawyer." You leaked the information?" "No." She looked him in the eye. "But I won't cover up your schemes anymore." The stock continued to fall. Investors demanded an extraordinary shareholders' meeting. The board of directors appointed an independent audit. Marilyn continued to play the role of the devoted wife. She organized a charity evening where Trenton was supposed to give a speech. "We need to show that everything is stable in the company," she said, "that these are just temporary difficulties." But Trenton could no longer maintain the appearance of calm. He made mistakes, snapped at his subordinates, and missed important meetings. On Friday, a new article appeared, this time about the CEO's personal life. An anonymous source talked about his affairs with female employees, the pressure he put on them, and how he forced them to participate in financial fraud. "It's over," Trenton whispered, staring at the computer screen. Marilyn put her hand on his shoulder. "Don't be dramatic, dear. We'll get through this together." He didn't notice her taking out her phone and sending a short message. Time to move on to the next phase. In the evening, the board of directors gathered for a closed meeting. Without Trenton, "We have every reason to remove him from office," said Robert Chen. "We need to act quickly before the company's reputation is completely destroyed," Margaret Wilson agreed. Cheyenne gathered her last belongings and left the company building. A taxi was waiting for her at the exit. "To the airport," she told the driver. Marilyn watched the car drive away. Now all the pieces were in place. All that remained was to make the final move. John F. Kennedy Airport was buzzing with its usual hustle and bustle. Cheyenne was sitting in a cafe waiting for her flight to Seattle when she saw Marilyn approaching. Decided to run away? Marilyn sat down opposite her, elegant as always in her gray suit. What's the point of staying? My career is ruined. Not necessarily. Marilyn took a folder out of her bag. I have a proposal. Cheyenne smiled bitterly. Another offer from the Kingsley family? No. This offer is from a woman who was also once deceived by Trenton. Marilyn opened the folder. The board of directors is launching an official investigation. They need a key witness. And you want me to be that witness? You know all the details of his schemes. You've seen the documents. You were present at the meetings. Your testimony will be crucial. And what do I get in return? Immunity. An official statement from the company that you cooperated with the investigation. Letters of recommendation from members of the board of directors. The opportunity to start with a clean slate. Cheyenne stared out the window at the planes taking off for a long time. Why are you doing this? Because Trenton has to answer for everything, and because you deserve a chance at a normal life. An hour later, they were sitting in a law firm's office, preparing documents. Cheyenne told her everything about her first meeting with Trenton, his promises, the strange financial transactions. He always said it was standard practice, she said, sorting through the papers, that all big companies do it. Marilyn methodically wrote down every detail. They worked late into the night, gathering evidence and organizing information. The next day, Trenton tried to call Cheyenne. She quit, his secretary told him. They say she flew to Seattle. He didn't know that at that moment Cheyenne was sitting in the conference room of a law firm, giving testimony to representatives of the board of directors. It started with small amounts, she said. Then the amount started to grow. He said it was for new projects. Meanwhile, Marilyn was preparing the ground for the decisive blow. She met with journalists, hinting at upcoming revelations. She gathered support from key shareholders. There will be a special board meeting tomorrow, she told Cheyenne. Are you ready? Do I have a choice? You always have a choice, but we don't always make the right one. In the evening, Marilyn returned home. Trenton was sitting in his office trying to salvage what was left of his empire. Hard day? She asked, bringing him tea. Everything is falling apart, he muttered, and I don't understand why. Sometimes we destroy what we've built ourselves, she said, placing the cup on the table. Good night, dear. In her bedroom, Marilyn took out her phone. Everything's ready. Tomorrow at 10. I'll be there, Cheyenne replied. In the morning, they met an hour before the meeting. Cheyenne was pale but determined. Remember, said Marilyn, tell the truth. Don't embellish anything. Just tell it like it is. Trenton still suspected nothing. He was preparing for his usual report to the board of directors, unaware that this would be his last appearance as CEO of Kingsley Pharmaceuticals. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the conference room at Kingsley Pharmaceuticals headquarters was full. The members of the board of directors took their seats, and there was a palpable tension in the air. Trenton Kingsley sat at the head of the table, reviewing his notes for the upcoming report. Robert Chen opened the meeting. Before we begin discussing the quarterly results, we have an unscheduled item. Miss Holbrook, please. Trenton looked up sharply. Standing in the doorway was Cheyenne, dressed in a strict dark blue suit. She walked to the podium, avoiding his gaze. Honorable members of the board of directors, her voice trembled slightly, but with each word it grew more confident. I must make a statement about systematic financial violations in our company. What kind of farce is this? Trenton tried to stand up, but Margaret Wilson gestured for him to remain seated. Continue, Miss Holbrook. Cheyenne began to speak. About fake contracts, about fictitious companies, about millions of dollars transferred through offshore accounts. With every word, Trenton's face grew paler. "Do you have any evidence to support these allegations?" Robert Chen asked. "Yes." Marilyn rose from her seat. "We have a complete file." She began handing out folders to the board members, bank statements, contracts, emails, years of carefully concealed fraud laid out in minute detail. "This is a forgery." Trenton slammed his fist on the table. "They've conspired against me." "Really?" Marilyn smiled. "Then explain why your signature is on every document. Why do the dates match your business trips? Why do the amounts correspond to purchases of real estate and jewelry?" Cheyenne continued talking about how she had been used to cover up illegal operations, about the pressure and manipulation, about how the careers of other women before her had been systematically destroyed. "You wouldn't dare," Trenton hissed. "I built this company." "No, dear." Marilyn placed the last folder in front of the board of directors. "Your father built this company, and you almost destroyed it." A heavy silence hung in the room. The board members looked through the documents, whispering quietly among themselves. "Mr. Kingsley," Robert Chen finally said, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Trenton began to talk about provocation from competitors, about a conspiracy, about how all the accusations were fabricated. But his words sounded empty and unconvincing. "I think we need to vote." Margaret Wilson glanced around at those present. "Who is in favor of immediately removing Mr. Kingsley from his position as CEO?" Hands went up one after another, unanimously. "You can't do this!" Trenton jumped up. "I'll take you to court." "I advise you to think twice," Marilyn said calmly. "Otherwise, the next step will be to go to the prosecutor's office." By evening, the news had spread throughout the business press. Scandal at Kingsley Pharmaceuticals. CEO fired for financial fraud. The end of a dynasty. How ambition and greed destroyed a pharmaceutical giant. A love triangle and millions in embezzlement. The story of Trenton Kingsley's downfall. Cheyenne left the building through a back door, avoiding the journalists. In her pocket was an official letter from the board of directors confirming her cooperation with the investigation. Marilyn watched from her office window as security escorted Trenton out of the building. The man she once loved had become a pitiful shadow of his former self. "Marilyn," Robert Chen appeared in the doorway. "The board of directors would like to discuss temporary leadership of the company with you." She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the window. 20 years of marriage had ended not with tears and scandal, but with cold, calculated revenge. And for some reason, it felt right. The first 2 weeks after Trenton's dismissal were like a perfect storm. Every morning brought new headlines in the press. Every day new details of his machinations emerged. Reporters camped outside his house, trying to get comments. The phone rang off the hook with calls from former partners demanding explanations. Financial scandal at Kingsley Pharmaceuticals. Scale of embezzlement exceeds expectations. Trenton Kingsley's shadow empire. How the CEO cheated shareholders. Love triangle in the corporate jungle. The story of the fall of a pharmaceutical magnate. Trenton locked himself in their country house, refusing to communicate even with his lawyers. Marilyn knew from the servants that he hardly ever left his office, drank heavily, and stared at one spot for hours. The federal prosecutor's office launched an official investigation. Investigators examined every document and every transaction over the past 10 years. The scale of the financial violations turned out to be even greater than Marilyn had imagined. "We have uncovered a whole network of shell companies," the lead investigator told her. "Your husband has created an impressive scheme for embezzling funds." As the main witness, Cheyenne received official protection from the prosecutor's office. Her testimony became key to the investigation. She described in detail all the schemes, meetings, and informal agreements. "Miss Holbrook showed civic courage," said a representative of the prosecutor's office at a press conference. Thanks to her cooperation, we were able to uncover one of the largest corporate frauds in recent years. Marilyn hired the best divorce lawyer in New York. Laura Hendricks was famous for never losing a property division case. Considering all the circumstances, Laura said as she reviewed the documents, we can claim 80% of the jointly acquired property. His financial machinations give us some excellent leverage. The most difficult part was talking to the children. Ethan and Ashley flew in from college as soon as the scandal broke. Marilyn gathered them in the living room of her new apartment on Park Avenue. "I should have told you sooner," she began, looking at the confused faces of her children. "Your father, he stopped being the man we knew a long time ago." "But why didn't you tell us?" Ashley cried, clutching her smartphone with the latest article about the scandal. "I wanted to protect you. I hoped I could fix everything without a public scandal." Ethan was silent, staring out the window. He had always been like his father, the same facial features, the same mannerisms. "All my classmates are talking about it," he finally said. "They're asking me if it's true that my father stole millions." Marilyn walked over to her son and hugged him around the shoulders. "Listen, your father's mistakes are not your mistakes. You are building your own life." The media continued to dig up new details. Journalists found other women who had been victims of Trenton's schemes. Interviews appeared with former employees talking about his manipulation and pressure. Forbes published an in-depth investigation titled "Anatomy of a Deception," how Trenton Kingsley turned a family business into a criminal scheme. The Wall Street Journal published a series of articles on the corporate culture at Kingsley Pharmaceuticals and how one man was able to manipulate an entire control system. The company's shares began to recover slowly after Marilyn was appointed interim CEO. Investors appreciated her openness and willingness to reform. "Mrs. Kingsley is demonstrating exactly the kind of leadership the company needs right now," commented one major shareholder. Cheyenne moved to Boston, where she took a position as a consultant at a small pharmaceutical company. Her story became an example of how cooperation with investigators can help save a career even after involvement in a corporate scandal. Trenton tried to contact his children, but they did not answer his calls. Ashley deleted all their photos together from social media. Ethan changed his last name to his mother's maiden name. "You know," Ashley once said to her mother, "I always thought we had the perfect family. Now I realize it was just a beautiful facade." Marilyn filed for divorce a month after the investigation began. The documents were flawlessly drafted. Every amount, every bill, every piece of real estate was accounted for. "He won't be able to contest a single item," Laura Hendricks assured her, "especially with the results of the investigation." In the evenings, sitting in her new office in the company building, Marilyn reviewed the day's news. The story of her family and company had turned into a soap opera that the entire business community was following. But she knew this was only the beginning. Ahead lay court cases, testimony, and endless proceedings. Trenton would not give up without a fight, even if she held all the cards. "Mom," Ashley called her one day, "do you really think he ever loved us?" "I think he loved the idea of family," Marilyn replied. "The idea of success, the idea of power, but real love requires honesty, and your father never had that." The media continued to follow every twist and turn of the story. Photographers camped outside the prosecutor's office, trying to catch the moment when Trenton would be formally charged. But Marilyn no longer read the articles. She had a company to save, children to support, and a new life to build. Marilyn's first official appearance as interim CEO of Kingsley Pharmaceuticals was scheduled for 9 o'clock on Monday morning. The conference room was packed with employees, journalists, and board members waiting for her words. "Recent events have shown us the need for radical change." Marilyn stood at the podium, confident and composed. "We are starting a new chapter in the company's history. Complete financial transparency, ethical business practices, and an innovative approach to development are our priorities. After the speech, Robert Chen shook her hand. You know, for the first time in a long time, I am confident about the future of the company. Cheyenne was transferred to the research department in Boston. Her experience and knowledge proved invaluable in the development of new drugs. This is a chance to start with a clean slate, Marilyn told her before she left. Use it wisely. The company slowly rebuilt its reputation. A new policy of transparency, regular reports to shareholders, and strict financial control gradually restored investor confidence. Kingsley Pharmaceuticals is demonstrating an exemplary case of crisis management, wrote the Financial Times. Trenton tried to reach both women. He wrote letters, left messages, and tried to meet through mutual acquaintances. Marilyn, please let's talk. His voice sounded desperate on the answering machine. I can explain everything. Cheyenne received similar messages. You don't understand. I really loved you. Everything can be fixed. But both women remained silent. Their lives were already on a new path. Marilyn immersed herself completely in her work. She restructured the company, met with investors, and launched new projects. In the evenings, she returned to her new apartment, where photos of her children and the silence she had finally learned to appreciate awaited her. Cheyenne discovered a real passion. In a laboratory in Boston, she was doing the research she had always dreamed of. Her articles began to appear in scientific journals. You know, she said once during a video conference with Marilyn, I feel for the first time that I'm doing something that really matters. Trenton watched their success from the sidelines. His attempts to start a new business failed. His reputation was hopelessly ruined. Banks refused to give him loans, and his former partners didn't answer his calls. In the Kingsley Pharmaceuticals office, the last reminders of the former CEO gradually disappeared. His photos were taken down from the walls, and his name was removed from the company website. Strange, Margaret Wilson remarked one day, but it seems like the company is running more efficiently without him. Marilyn understood that this was only the beginning of a long journey. There was still a lot of work to be done, many decisions to be made, and many changes to come. But for the first time in a long time, she felt that she was moving in the right direction. Every morning, she entered the company building with a sense of confidence. Employees greeted her with respect that had nothing to do with her last name or her status as the former CEO's wife. Mrs. Kingsley, a young employee, called out to her one day, then blushed. I'm sorry, Miss Foster. That's right, she smiled. Just Miss Foster now. In her office lay a folder with divorce papers. Soon, her marriage to Trenton would be just a chapter in her past. But the company they had once built together would be reborn under her leadership. Cheyenne had also found her way. New ideas and new developments were emerging from her laboratory in Boston. She was no longer seeking the approval of powerful men. She was creating her own success story. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself, she wrote in a letter to Marilyn. Trenton continued to appear in the news, but now only in the context of court cases and financial scandals. His time was over, and he knew it better than anyone. At the Kingsley Pharmaceuticals office, a new day was beginning. The company was alive, growing, moving forward, under the leadership of a woman who knew the price of success, betrayal, and forgiveness. A warm spring evening enveloped Manhattan in the golden light of the setting sun. Marilyn Foster stood at the panoramic window of her office on the top floor of the Kingsley Pharmaceuticals building, admiring the city. Exactly 1 year had passed since the events that changed everything. Forbes magazine lay on her desk, open to the article, Woman of the Year in the Pharmaceutical Business. Her photo on the cover radiated confidence and calm, qualities she had finally learned to appreciate in herself. Over the past year, the company had not only regained its position, but had reached new heights. Shares had risen by 40%. Contracts had been signed with major medical centers, and innovative research projects had been launched. "Mom, have you seen the latest news?" Ashley's voice sounded excited on the phone. "Dad is trying to start a consulting firm in Chicago." Marilyn smiled. She had heard about it. She had also heard that all potential partners had refused to work with him. Reputation was a fragile thing, especially in the world of big business. Ethan, her pride and joy, had just graduated from business school and started working at an investment bank. He was no longer ashamed of his last name. Now he was Ethan Foster, and the name was already making waves in business circles. "You know, Mom," he had said recently, "I finally understand what real power means. It's not the ability to manipulate others, but the ability to be honest with yourself." Cheyenne unexpectedly found herself in San Francisco. She headed the research department at a promising biotech startup. Her articles were regularly published in leading scientific journals. "Sometimes I think about that time," she wrote in her last letter to Marilyn, "and I realize it was a necessary lesson. Now I know my true worth." The phone on Marilyn's desk flashed with a new message. Another attempt by Trenton to reconnect. She didn't even bother to open it. The past should stay in the past. In the evening, her children gathered at her penthouse on Park Avenue. Ashley brought her fiancé, a young professor from Yale. Ethan came with news of a promotion. They talked, laughed, and made plans. "Remember how we were afraid the scandal would ruin our lives?" Ashley asked, hugging her mother. "And it turned out to make us stronger." Marilyn looked at her grown children and thought about how strange life was. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. The next day, she held another board meeting. Now they called her simply Marilyn, with a respect that couldn't be bought or stolen. Interim CEO had long since become a permanent position. Under her leadership, the company had not only survived, it had thrived. New developments, ethical business practices, transparent financial policies, everything she had always dreamed of. That evening, she received a letter from Robert Chen, who had retired. "You know, Marilyn, I've seen a lot of corporate dramas, but your story isn't just a story of revenge or justice. It's a story of how honesty and integrity triumph over lies and manipulation." On Saturday, she visited the grave of her father-in-law, the company's founder. "Your son betrayed your legacy," she said quietly, "but I swear I will preserve and build on what you created." Trenton, according to rumors, now lived in a small apartment in Chicago. All his attempts to return to big business had failed. Former partners turned their backs on him. Banks refused to give him loans. His time was up. Cheyenne sent a photo from her new laboratory. "Thank you for showing me the path to true self-fulfillment. Sometimes betrayal is a gift from fate." Marilyn often thought about how one decision could change so many lives. Her revenge was not just punishment for her unfaithful husband. It became a catalyst for change for everyone involved. "The main thing," she said recently in an interview, "is not to let past grievances determine the future. You have to use them as a springboard for growth." There were no more photos of her past life in her new office, only pictures of her children, diplomas, and company awards, and a small statuette of the goddess of justice, a gift from Cheyenne before she left. Every morning she entered the company building with a sense of pride, not for revenge, not for victory over her ex-husband, but for turning her personal tragedy into a success story. "You know, Mom," Ethan said one day, "you taught us the most important thing, that strength isn't about the ability to hurt others, but about the ability to remain human even after betrayal." Outside the window, the city continued to live its life, indifferent to human drama. But now Marilyn knew that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself, and that reward is worth any hardship.